Okay, so now for this next part, things get a little bit more delicate, so please bear with me. Now, when you finally put them both together, your bow and your violin, and you start trying to get those first notes out, you will notice that, well, chances are you will not be making a very pleasing sound. In fact, the violin has a reputation for being particularly difficult, especially at the very start. If you compare it with other instruments, like for example the piano, where at the end of your very first lesson you could go home being able to play little things like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, Happy Birthday, or simple pieces like that. But on the violin, unfortunately, that's generally not how it works. Things tend to take a little bit more time at first. It's very much like that first build-up of a roller coaster, and you could go the first handful of months, the first half a year, until you're actually finally able to make a sound that you're somewhat happy and satisfied with. And all that it requires from you is just a little bit more patience. So why don't we go ahead and get ready to start, so that I can show you how we're going to do that in the best possible way. So the first thing I want you to keep in mind, particularly at the beginning, is that you want to make sure that at all times your bow is going to be completely parallel with the bridge, or in other words, completely perpendicular with the strings. So if you're facing a mirror, for example, which I highly recommend, or in my case, a screen, and you place your bow as close as possible to the middle between the edge of the fingerboard and the bridge itself, then your bow should always be completely parallel with the bridge. So try to avoid this, try to avoid that as well. So you can go ahead and give that a try a couple of times to get a better feel for how that works. But I would also like to point out that when you place the bow on the string, just like when you place your violin on your shoulder, you should try to avoid changing your posture, altering your position in any way to kind of fit the violin. Remember that the violin was actually made to adapt to your body, to the human body, and not the other way around. So you should always remain as natural, as relaxed as possible. Just like this. I place my violin on my shoulder, I place the bow right there, and there you go. It's parallel, my shoulders are not moving, and even as I draw the bow up and down and play different notes and different things, my shoulders stay in the same position. Now, I would like to talk about the actual mechanics of the arm movement, and for that, let's just set the violin aside for a moment and talk about our actual arm. Now, for us, particularly in the context of violin playing, we're going to divide our arm in 3 different parts. And the first one is going to be right here, so from your shoulder to your elbow, and that's what we are actually going to call the arm. So your arm ends here. And from here to here, that's what we're going to call your forearm. And then after that, we have, well, the wrist or the hand, which comes a little bit later. For now, we're going to talk about these first 2 parts. So your arm and your forearm. And the important thing to keep in mind is that each of these parts has a very important job. And their jobs are very different, and their jobs cannot be mixed and or exchanged. So just to put it a little bit more clearly, your arm is going to take care only and exclusively of up and down movements, vertical movements. And in the case of violin playing, that comes into play when we're thinking about string crossings. If you want to go from one lower string to a higher string, that's all going to be managed by actually moving your arm. And by arm, I mean the actual technical arm. So from here to here, remember that, by moving your arm up and down. That means that only under very, very rare circumstances you're going to move your arm left and right, because that's not its job. That's actually the job of the forearm itself. The forearm actually takes care of all horizontal movements. So in the case of violin playing, that's basically when you're drawing your bow up and down. That means that just like the other part of the arm, the forearm doesn't really move up and down, unless, we're talking about very rare circumstances, but those are things that you don't need to worry about right now. Those come into like the more advanced concepts. So for all intents and purposes, the arm takes care of vertical movements and the forearm takes care of horizontal movements. If you take care of that and you're careful with this, you will see how actually you'll be a lot more capable of keeping a straight bow all the way through. If not, then you'll start mixing the movements a little bit haphazardly, and the bow will start, you will start losing control of the bow will start changing position, changing orientation, and the sound will also be greatly affected by this. Now, having said that, we have to keep in mind that we are all different. We all have different bodies, different heights, different lengths, different widths, different girths, and everything else in between. So of course, things are going to be a little bit different for all of us. These are not unbreakable rules that I'm talking about, but just general guidelines of how to do things. So you will see, and these are the exceptions that I was talking about earlier, that sometimes if you want to reach all the way to the frog of the bow, you're going to need to maybe nudge your arm a little bit forward so that it actually helps you reach the frog. All, of course, depending on the actual length of your arm. But in general terms, or at least in my personal case, I start, of course, the movement slightly with my arm, and when I reach more or less a 90-degree angle, and I know that my arm, so once again from my shoulder to my elbow, is in its resting position, so it's kind of just hanging with gravity, then it stops moving right there. I'm not going to continue moving my arm stops right there, and I just start drawing the bow further down with my forearm until I reach the tip. And then on the way back, I do exactly the same thing once again. I move up until I reach more or less a 90-degree angle, and then my arm continues pushing forward until I can finish the movement. These are kind of the basic mechanics of bowing, so that you can actually do it, keeping a straight bow from the frog to the tip. So go ahead and try that a few times. I would like you to try playing with very long bowings, very long, slow bowings, 4 times each string. So we're going to take the G string and do it 4 times slowly, and then the D string 4 times slowly, and so on with the A string and the E string. And as you do it, I want you to alternate your attention between the actual movements of your arm and the point of contact of your bow to make sure that it's always passing right through the middle between the fingerboard and the bridge. So good luck with that, and let me know down in the comments how it goes.